Welcome.
Please welcome
to another episode of the Tools of the Trade podcast, your #1 construction industry resource. Hear conversations with industry professionals to get the tools, stories, and advice that you need to set your career on fire. You're now streaming the Tools of the Trade podcast.
What's up, guys? Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Tools of the Trade. If you are watching, thank you for watching. If you are listening, thank you so much for tuning in. I have decided that it is a good time to start compiling good quality resources that we can pull from in the construction community to help get us through the COVID-19 pandemic. And that is in the form of a blog post that I've created, which compiles all of the resources I have found from other companies that have given tools and templates that you can just download and plug straight into your business. So you don't have to spend the time creating them, because not all of us have the time right now, especially to be formulating all that stuff ourselves. So please check out my website at toolspodcast.com/COVID-19. And I'm adding to that list daily. So if there's anything that you have found to be of value, or if you have created something that you're willing to share, please send it to me or leave it in the comment section on the website, or send it to me on social media, and I will review it and potentially upload it to the website to create that list and try and share it with as many people in the construction community as possible. And today's guest that I'm having on to speak directly to COVID-19 is Ed Matley of PWC Canada. PWC is a large consulting Big Four firm that a lot of you have probably heard about or seen, and he leads their business continuity practice. And I've known Ed for a few years, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to try and steal 30 minutes of his time to get up-to-the-minute information as to what he's dealing with, how his clients are dealing with specific things, how he advises people to deal with things right now, also in the future. And, you know, there's quite a few milestones that we're going to have to deal with. So obviously the first milestone is come and pass. We're here now. So what do we do in the interim to deal with it? What do we do to prevent it from happening again in the future? As in, how are we better prepared for the next time there is a disaster or an outage of some kind, whether that's IT related, it doesn't matter. Are we going to have a plan? But the third component is the midterm step. And that is, what are we going to do when we go back to work? Because there is going to be a new normal. The same way that 9/11 changed the way we travel, COVID-19 and all of this online communication and online work structure that we have deployed is going to change the way that we work as a business. And he gets into a lot of stuff about business continuity. I won't bore you with all of that right now. Just listen to the episode. It's only 30 minutes and there's a lot of great takeaways. But he also talks about the silver lining. And the silver lining is very important. We're getting really caught up right now, and we're probably buried in what we're doing to get through the day-to-day. We're taking this day by day and we're trying to formulate a plan to stay open, to ensure that our employees are safe and happy and healthy. But there's going to be the return to work portion before we start planning again for what if this happens in the future, some sort of disaster. And that piece is very crucial, because you're going to have to deal with that and deal with the people coming back to your organization in a touch and go manner. And that is because a lot of people coming back to work, depending on what your organization went through, are going to be dealing with specific things such as trauma from potential loss. They're going to be dealing with potential financial stress. They're going to be dealing with potentially of being sick or their family members being sick through this. They're going to be dealing with potential financial strain, layoffs, all that stuff. It's caused trauma for the workforce, and you can't just flick a switch on and expect everybody to be up, back on their feet and ready to go. But those companies that are able to do that diligently and respectfully and get on their feet fastest are going to be able to hit the market the hardest and keep their doors open longer when they go back to work. So there is a silver lining in all this. And again, if you have any resources that you would like to contribute, please feel free to send those to me. Leave them in the comment section on the website. Leave them in my inbox anywhere that you happen to be watching this video, and I'd be more than happy to share them. That could be anything that you've created that you'd like to share for other people to download so that they can use right away, because right now we don't have a lot of time to put forth plans. A lot of us were caught on our heels. So I hope that you get a lot of good information out of this episode. I hope these resources are valuable to you, and I hope that you have something to share. And please share this episode and my webpage with anybody you think that could use it right now or would find value in it in these uncertain times. And with all that being said, here is my guest today, Edward Matley. All right, Ed, thank you so much for joining me on Tools of the Trade. This is a unique interview, and there's a few interviews that I've been trying to push out in as it relates to COVID-19 to try and give us construction professionals more tools in our tool belt to deal with these unusual circumstances. I know when it comes to construction, obviously there's a broad size of company. We have multi-million and billion-dollar organizations that may have business continuity plans in place for these types of situations, but then we also have our smaller contractors that don't even know what that is and may be able to get a bit of advice on best practices and things like that. But I'd like to just start with you outlining the company you work for, your position, and what exactly your practice does.
Sure, thanks, Colin. So my name's Ed Matley. I'm a partner with PWC. I'm based in Vancouver. I lead our business continuity practice for Canada. So we help clients of all sizes, to be honest, develop a response capability for a wide range of incidents or disruption. So whether that be, fire, flood, your typical sort of acts of God. We help clients respond to cyber disruption. So how they could, respond to loss of IT systems. We also look at supply chain. So, actions that organizations can take to minimize disruption to their, serving their clients if they experience loss of critical vendors. And then obviously the hot topic at the moment is, mass absenteeism. So what people can do as they start to, lose access to their people. So we've been doing that for 20 odd years now. And in Canada, been leading this practice with PwC since 2015.
Amazing. So the place that I'd like to start, and obviously these questions are based off of your recommendations because you're the expert, and by no means am I an expert, so that's why I have you on the podcast. But I thought we'd start with how you advise clients to respond to situations like this.
Yeah, so for us, like there's like a 3-stepped approach, right? So a lot of what organizations are going through right now is kind of trying to mobilize their people, right? There's a bit of scrambling going on in terms of, there's been an event or an impending event, and this is we refer to this kind of thing as a smoldering crisis. So it's not like a big shock thing that's just happened. It's something that's been developing over months, which can be more even sort of trickier to respond to. So there's a mobilized phase. There's what we call a stabilized phase, which is where an organization gets into a position that they can continue to operate at some sort of acceptable level during the period of disruption. And then what we think of as the strategized phase, which is how organizations start to think about slightly longer term. Are there any opportunities that can present themselves for them moving forward?
Right. So when this started to kick up in China, this must have been on your guys' radar immediately, and you were starting to advise clients. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was actually kind of funny. So the World Health Organization tracks and monitors outbreaks of disease all the time. So they're happening all the time. I've had enough experience of monitoring those things now to be able to kind of sniff when something's a bit fishy, right? So when they start to report things out broader, then you know that there's something brewing. The World Health Organization changed how they report sort of outbreaks based on their experience that they got through SARS. So what happened with SARS was there was massive impact on GDP. That companies or countries experienced because people were downing tools and they were stopping work, and so the World Health Organization changed how they classify different outbreaks to make it be less kind of impactful. This one was a smolderer right from the beginning. And it was funny. I started sort of reaching out to our clients and saying, hey, is this like on your radar? Are you thinking anything about this? Are you pulling out your your H1N1 plans, like you're giving it some thought? And there was a lot of yeah, it's okay, Ed, yeah, we got it, we think it's all right, like we'll be okay. And then I was going to the UK, this was like 4 weeks ago now, and I was flying on the Monday, and the Monday morning I just got hammered with clients kind of we're getting questions from the board, or the executives kind of panicking now. I think it just reached critical mass on the news, right, where the numbers started to get reported and things like that, and then people started panicking a little bit. So So we really did start to get a lot of questions, and then since then it's been constant. Like, we've got constant requests.
So what exactly, when these clients are coming to you and saying, okay, now we're kind of in panic mode and we have questions about how to respond, how are they supposed to respond to this when it comes to internally to their stakeholders, and then also the information that they're presenting to their teams to keep transparency?
Yeah, so I mean, in an ideal world, obviously, like your organization has done a little bit of planning, right? In my ideal world, and there are components to that plan. So typically, there's some sort of thought about what an organization would consider as a pandemic plan. So what are the actions that you can take if there's an outbreak of infectious disease? And they don't happen very frequently, but when they do, they tend to be big. So some sort of thoughts around that. And then there's some kind of thoughts around crisis management. So this is really, how are you going to organize your team so that you can continue to stay abreast of the situation, you can get out ahead of the message, you can communicate. And then the final bit is like the business continuity aspect. So how can you continue to operate your business given the outbreak that's occurred? Those three elements. For, like you were talking before, there's different sizes of clients. So for a large organization, that can be many different plans, right? There can be, we always look for a single crisis management sort of structure, but there can be many different sort of pandemic plans for different parts of their business. There can be many different business continuity plans for each kind of business unit. But even for a small organization, like, it doesn't have to be a big red binder, right, that sort of sits on the shelf. It can just be some thoughts that are on a page. It doesn't even need to be explicitly written down, in my mind. If you've got your executive or you've got your leadership group that have given some thought to these things in advance, and you can always fall back on that. So those are the three sort of aspects. Like the mobilize bit right now, we're looking at how can organizations take actions that they can look after their staff in the main, right? That's most organizations' primary concern. How do we make sure that people are safe? And so some of that is, there's obviously a lot of people sort of working from home, but not everybody has that option, right? And especially not in your industry. So then it's what actions can be taken at sites to make sure that we're keeping people as safe as possible. So trying to limit transmission. How are we going to try and make sure that the people on site are safe? So those kind of components. That's really the stabilized bit. We are encouraging clients to think sort of broadly around communication. So there's a lot of miscommunication. Like, social media is an absolute cesspit for that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, it's terrible.
In some cases, there's good information that's in there, but there's an awful lot that's not, and there's an awful lot of misinformation, conflicting information. So quite a lot of people do look to their organization as trying to be like a good source of that. And so identifying where are the sorts of good information, both external information that you can sort of echo back to your people, but then also good information about your own practices. So, people are interested about what's happening. Are people getting sick? Are there people in your organization that are exhibiting symptoms? And so getting ahead of that, having somebody in your organization that has been tasked with, monitoring external communication and putting out your company's sort of perspective on that, but then also monitoring and collecting information about your people and contractors and all of that kind of stuff, the people that are in your organization's sphere, and reporting that as well in a manner that's sort of consistent with your company values, right? Those kind of things. We also recommend, though, taking a bit of a broader standpoint or a bit of a broader thought about communication. So yes, employees are number one, and then customers are probably number two. Like, to what extent are you getting information out to your clients about your practices, and how you're keeping both your people safe, but making sure that they're as safe as possible. But then also things like investors, banks, boards, wherever you're getting your money from, even your supply chain. So having those kind of communications as well, and thinking about taking that broader view, thinking about sort of strategically, how are we going to contact these people, including like contact information. So not everybody's working in the offices right now. Do you have information to how you can reach these people? What kind of information do you expect that they would want from you as an organization? how frequently do you think that they would want it, and then who ought to be delivering that message. So who is that message best coming from? So just sitting down, you can draw that out in a little napkin worth, right? Like just giving some thought to that, and then trying to execute along that. We're definitely, certainly from an employee standpoint, there's almost like no communication. There's not such thing as too much communication. Or like the more the merrier in terms of right now, people looking for getting out in front of that message. So certainly that from the communication standpoint.
Yeah, and definitely on the communication aspect. I know this is, broad and it speaks to most industries, but in construction, we call it the job site rumor mill. And if there's information coming out from, or not enough information, I should say, coming out from your organization, then people start to formulate their own opinions on the situation, and that can spread rapidly through a company. And unfortunately, right now in construction, it seems like a lot of us are stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do we want to keep our families safe who are forced to work from home by not going to work and risk potentially being laid off or losing our job in the interim? Or do we want to go in and continue to work on these job sites and do it at our own risk? It's kind of a tough position to be in. One of the questions I had that was more broadly in relations to business continuity is, are those plans typically created in the background by senior management, and then should the employees be made aware that there is plans in place for these things, or are they kind of made aware as situations arise?
Well, from our standpoint, we'd always recommend that the people that are involved in developing the plan are the people that would be involved in executing the plan. So to try and make sure that their opinion, their knowledge, their understanding of the business and the operations is reflected. There's a risk that if something's developed by senior management, that they, even if they were on site, some time ago, that things have changed, and so that it doesn't reflect, current practices. So get them involved that way, and then also, it helps to get engagement, right? Like if you've involved the people in the creation of the plan, then it's their plan. It's not management's plan. It's not somebody who doesn't understand their realities plan. So definitely get them in that, and then even just the process of going through planning, and whether that is formally documenting plans or just sitting back and thinking about like what are we going to do if something bad happens, sort of gets the people that are involved in that actually more prepared to respond. Or the last thing that you want is for something bad to happen and then to be presented with a plan and sort of told to execute it if you weren't involved in that plan, or you haven't been trained in its execution. And training in BCP is something that doesn't happen a lot, right? Yeah. So from my standpoint, getting people involved for sure. And then we kind of have like 3 levels of sort of training or awareness that we sort of like to do. One is, training of the executive, like the senior people, so that they know that there is a plan and so that they know not to interfere with it, essentially. Often senior people, something bad goes wrong, they want to get out, they want to get the, roll up their sleeves, they want to help. And those kind of things are well-intentioned, but they don't necessarily always, result in a good outcome. You've got the people that have been involved in the plan development, like they're probably the best. Then there's the training for the people who would be expected to execute the plan. So those people who need to know what to do and when to do it. And then there's the rest of the organization or the rest of the stakeholders. And that is, some of those things would just be understanding what policies there are that are in place, understanding what your organization would expect from them. Like, do you still expect people to show up for work? Do you expect them to keep a check-in? Like, what do you expect of them? Do you expect them to self-report? Do you expect them to self-isolate when they return from travel? Like all of those kind of things. So getting that information out to everybody.
Now, as it relates to most industries, a lot of us are caught on our heels with this, and it's in full effect right now. So if an organization, after this all snaps back to normal, whenever that normal is looking to start developing a plan or recruit a business continuity professional, or even if it's a really small organization that's, say, less than 10 people that wants to be better prepared for next time, what kind of exercises would you recommend them starting with to ensure that they have a plan in place for not just an outbreak of disease like we're experiencing now, but it could be any sort of major disruption in the business. How should they start thinking about that for next time?
So, I mean, there's a couple of components to like the forward-thinking stuff. So, yeah, there are a lot of organizations that got caught with their pants around their ankles, and there's going to be a lot of hard questions asked, like why were we not ready for that? For me, the best way to develop a capability for responding to any kind of disruption is through exercise. I care a lot less about documentation and more about just putting people in a scenario, in a safer manner as possible, and getting them to think through how they would respond to that. So, there's a lot of organizations of the key risks right now are, cyber. So, what would happen if you experience a cyber breach? What would happen if you have loss of IT, which is sometimes linked with that? What would happen if you lost your main building, like your head office, or your main site, like location, fire, whatever those kind of things are? It doesn't need to be like a big boil the ocean type of activity, right? It's a question of taking a step back just for an hour or so every now and again, whether that be once a year even, but going through this thought of there are a number of different scenarios that could impact us. If it happened, what would we do? And just chatting it around, like thinking through it based on our current experience, based on where we are, like what would we do? Just going through that thought process, that experiential learning is going to make you more successful, right? It's going to identify maybe some things that you could think about. So, like there's a lot of companies that weren't really set up to work remotely, right? Like those kind of organizations, if you'd had things like, cloud sharing drives or access to laptops and those kind of things, like making your workforce more mobile, those organizations that had that degree of sort of resilience built in have been much less impacted. Now in construction, there's only a part of your business, right? The sort of support components that are easy to do that, the management bits. But to even having that in place is, would be super beneficial. And just identifying the need for those things could come through a very simple exercise. Doesn't need to be a lot of work.
Now, when it comes to people's mentality, and this is not just related to your industry, but most industries where you're planning for something that may never happen. And I'm sure you get a lot of pushback from people saying, this isn't going to happen to me. I'm not going to lose my building. There's going to be no disease. My company is bulletproof. So how do you recommend people shift their mindset to be more forward thinking and proactive instead of saying it's not going to happen to me?
I think, so certainly from my business, right? Like these cycles happen, right? And when these things happen, then people do put a bit of focus on it, right? Like BCP and any of these kind of response kind of things, they're not urgent until they're really friggin' urgent. But then there comes a time. I often get asked like how which kind of organizations are better prepared and stuff like that, and it really doesn't matter. Like my experience is that those organizations are best prepared are those that have they have somebody senior who has lived through a major disruption, and either they had a plan and they saw its value in operation, or they didn't have a plan and they got caught. Those people tend to be a bit more prepared to invest in planning for the future, right? So it's difficult. It's a constant uphill battle for me, right? Like that's kind of my life. And people in this kind of area, they're constantly trying to get the ear of senior people to be like, you should really need to think about a plan. Like our approach is to try and keep it as pragmatic as possible, right? Like it's difficult when people start thinking about the very traditional approaches to BCP, and you've got to do a business impact analysis and a risk assessment, and you've got to develop documents, and you've got to exercise and continuous improvement and all that kind of stuff. You got to right size it for your organization, and in my mind, just do something, right? Just take a step forward, and that will get you on the right sort of path.
Gotcha. Now, one of the other, or one of the second to last things that I wanted to chat with you about was industries where, I guess this is most industries, in construction in particular, the subtrades are somewhat governed by the general contractor. If the general contractor says we're not going to stop operations, we're going to stay on site, and they're expecting schedule to be adhered to some degree, obviously there's all sorts of risk matrices and stuff that have been or will be sent out saying what are your potential impacts with supply chain, schedule, manpower, all that good stuff. Now, what if an organization such as a subtrade or anybody that is sort of underneath a larger parent company that's delivering on a project decides themselves that they don't want to put their employees at risk, and now that project is going to go on, and it's going to go on without these people, which is going to cause severe impacts to schedule, which could also cause contract breaches depending on what's in the contract. How should people think about that aspect?
So definitely an issue, yeah, for sure. So if you haven't done any of that, but thinking about those risks right now, including impacts on your working capital, cash flow, and cash is king right now. So if there's no modeling being done around that, I would suggest taking a little bit of time at the beginning of the day to sort of think about those implications. I mean, hopefully there are alternates that have been identified. Like if you're well prepared for your suppliers, your subtrades, and things like that, that you're not wholly dependent on one single organization, to the extent that you are, then there's going to be some scrambling, right? But I feel like the sooner that you can engage in the dialogue with those suppliers in terms of your supply chain, the better. So you can understand where you think that there are potential challenges. I think communicating to those suppliers about what measures you are taking to try and keep them and or their people safe on your site will really help with that, like help allay some of their fears. And then, absent that, like if they do decide, and people are pulling out contracts, I am not a contract lawyer. So, understanding things like force majeure and components of that in contracts is really not my area of specialty, but I do know from speaking to lawyers that that's a difficult thing to employ. One of the things, and again, I haven't got deep into this myself, is understanding what will be available in terms of compensation from the government. So you saw that, Canada's obviously announced this massive package. I don't know that they fully considered exactly where all of that's going and things like that, but making sure that you as an organization understand both in terms of what your contract terms, also any insurance that you do have, what's in there, and speak to your insurer, and then think a little bit, make sure that you understand what aid will be available to you as a business, and get on those applications as soon as you can, for sure.
Yeah, it makes sense. Now, how much of this should be documented for legal purposes, for insurance purposes, just for future business practices?
Yeah, so for future practices, it helps for documentation. For things like legal purposes and insurance purposes, you're almost screwed without it. So to the extent that it doesn't, I don't think it needs to be like super robust, but keeping as much of your communication electronic as possible and recording it sort of really helps with that, for sure, because any kind of claim is going to need to be supported by communication, and understanding what. That's why I was kind of saying, go to those contracts, go to those insurance documents, and understand what the expectations are around actions that you needed to have taken as an organization for you to be able to make those claims, or to be able to support your case, for sure.
Gotcha. So the last place I wanted to end off here was, obviously we're talking about potential future planning, but one of the near-term future plannings that we can do is what we're going to do when we actually do go back to work, and the impacts that are going to happen from potential layoffs or rehires, or there's just a huge laundry list of what could further impact you as you decide to transition back to the office or back to wherever it is you are. So what do people need to start thinking about? We're here now. We can't do much about it except take care of our staff and our projects, our jobs, all those things. So what do people need to think about when they're returning back to work?
Yeah, so I do think, and I think that's a really good point. So having somebody start thinking about those things now, rather than wait until the whole thing blows over and then be like, okay, what are we going to do? The organizations that are given thought to that now are those ones that are going to be able to ramp back up the fastest. and potentially have like prime mover advantage on those kind of things. So one component of that is that identification of like what do we think is going to happen. I think that having the contact information, keeping the contact information for the suppliers, trying to keep your relationship open as best that you can. I mean, people recognize that it's a tough time. If you just cut off ties with people and it's like so sad, like I apologize, but you're out, that's really gonna have a big impact on how those suppliers see you as an organization and the extent to which they're going to want to work with you in the past. So I feel like identifying who those sort of groups are that you want to continue to work with, maintaining the best relationships that you can with them, I think is sort of like your best bet. One other component is, some of the sort of social aspects of those things as well. So recognizing that people do respond to these kind of events in different ways, and trying to sort of bring them back in a manner that's sort of sensitive to what they would have been through. Quite a lot of people are going to be impacted personally, or like get the disease. But a lot of the people that get the disease aren't going to be, aren't going to have it too bad. But people are going to be impacted. People's families are going to be impacted, as much by the economic fallout as likely as from, the actual disease itself. So just sort of thinking of those aspects, making sure that you communicate with people in advance, and then when you do bring people back, be sensitive to their realities and what they've just sort of lived through. I think are good things to think about.
Is there anything else that you want to touch on or speak about before we wrap up?
I think the other bit, I talked about that sort of stabilize and then the strategize components of that response. And again, you talked there a little bit about the return to normal. What we're also encouraging organizations to do is, again, like try and take a step back sooner rather than later, and think about what opportunities this might present to you as an organization. So, there's a lot of doom and gloom right now, but the organizations that are seeing, like, give thought to how they can take advantage and come back fastest are the ones that are going to have, the most opportunities presented to them. So where that might be, access to the best suppliers, it might be, additional contracts. Giving some thought to, like, strategically, have we been on the right path, right? Like, have there been, have we been doing some things, either, projects or our ways of working that haven't been potentially as efficient as they could be? Like, giving that some thought. Are there changes that we can make now that are going to set us up for success for the future? We talked a little bit about things like digitization of your workspace, about being able to, enable remote working, some of those kind of things. If you can take some of those things and bake them in, and just really look for those, that's sort of silver lining, right? Like the bunch of studies that were done about, like, organizations that are seen to be in control, or like responders that bounce back a lot faster than those that seem to be out of control or didn't respond well. The impact on their organization and their reputation can last for a very long time. Like not just we'll come back and it'll be a couple of months, but like people trying to rebuild trust of, your clients, your customers, and your vendors can take a long time. So thinking about that now and being seen to be in control and, communicating well can make like a massive difference over the long term. Like, we're talking 18 months, 2 years worth. So definitely worth that step back. Everybody's sort of panicking, but taking that step back to think about, what does my next 12 months look like, 18 months, 24 months? Trying to make sure that your balance sheet is set up and that you're well prepared is a good thing to do.
Amazing. Well, Ed, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and giving some insights into your industry and some tools that we can deploy as construction workers, but also I think this applies broadly. So I really appreciate you coming on and spending a bit of time with us here to give us some things to think about and that silver lining that we should all be looking for instead of the doom and gloom mindset. I thought that was really great. So thanks again.
Thanks, Colin.
That's a wrap. That's a wrap, everybody.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Tools of the Trade podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a 5-star review. For show notes, blog posts, resources, and access to our newsletter, check out toolspodcast.com.